Yeah. Welcome to the joint press conference of Presidents Martin Schulz and Michael Higgins. We'll have two short statements and then we can do a round of questions until about 10 past 1 at the most, quarter past. Martin, please.
Vielen Dank, Armin. Thank you very much. Ich spreche in Deutsch.
Thank you very much. I shall speak to you in German. I would like to extend my warmest thanks to the Irish Prime Minister for coming here and giving us such an excellent address this morning. I knew when I invited you to come, sir, that you would give an absolutely excellent address, and we were all looking forward to very much to hearing what you had to say. Of course, we've also had the opportunity to have an exchange of views with you in Ireland, particularly focusing about Irish literature, on Irish literature and philosophy, and it's been enormously interesting to me. I didn't know how much Michael Higgins knew about Wittgenstein and philosophy and the German language, and I learned a whole lot of stuff about Ludwig Wittgenstein, from his writing to his biographical details and the time that he spent in Dublin. So I've learned a very great deal. And indeed, this was a complete discovery for me because I didn't know anything about this before. So I think probably I am better in politics after all than trying to pursue a career in philosophy. But in any event, it's been a huge privilege to me to have such an opportunity to meet a highly distinguished individual and to have the privilege of having such discussions with you. I've been so impressed by the courageous address that you gave to the Parliament. You obviously have a great deal of courage and you're determined to carry out the executive role which is yours in the spirit of absolute democracy. And this is so absolutely essential to us because this is the very essence of why we are here, to ensure that the tenets of democracy are fully respected. We believe in transparency and democratic legitimacy, and that is what we are seeking to achieve because our citizens expect no less of us. So you today have given us the courage to go forward, to continue in this endeavour, and you spoke to us in an encouraging and positive way which is unprecedented in the years and annals of history in this Parliament. I'm delighted to give you the floor. Thank you.
Mr. President, Laura Merla, I will speak in English. I first of all want to say how pleased I am to be here and to thank you for your invitation, which you gave me when you visited me in Dublin. It's a great privilege to address to the European Parliament. I should say immediately I'm not an executive prime minister. Those who had the opportunity to achieve that for me are in the past. But I'm president and therefore I have the opportunity of reflecting on the present condition of the European Union, present prospects, and particularly its present problems. I decided in my address to the Parliament to concentrate on one important point, and that is the necessity for there being a pluralism in analysis of our current problems. You see, it's very interesting as to that debate, which is not an immensely popular or populist one. It is as to whether you decide to model your problems and then you decide to drop off the actual realities that are all around you because the model can't handle them. And you then pursue the model irrespective of the fact that it isn't making connections, that it hasn't contingency. On the other hand, there is something that is not just old-fashioned at all, but it is the notion that you begin with the problems in all of their complexity. For example, the unemployment problem in its different age character, its different settings in industry and so forth. And you try to bring all of your resources together to try and construct a model that will in turn give policies. And I have been advocating this now for some time. Really, I spoke about this when I spoke at the Sorbonne. And it's a view that is reflected, I think, as well, about 12 years ago in Paris and in Cambridge, there was a movement by young economists to say we simply recognise we are not mathematical nihilists, neither am I. We are not against neoclassical theory, but we just simply want all of the available intellectual resources that are there to be able to produce the options that we need. But if you have a single model that is attached exclusively to the policy process, what is on offer then is in fact quite limited. There was one thing. The other is, of course, what my concern as President of Ireland, and I wanted to stress the long sustained interest of Irish people over the generations in matters European, a Europe without borders. We have gained so much in terms, not just in an economic sense, but in a social sense of modern connection with Europe, be it in relation to women's rights and so forth, be it in relation to advancing issues in relation to the environment. And then my other issue, which I think is I want to be free to answer questions that people may ask, is that I have been, since my inauguration in November 2011, been visiting parts of the world, such as South America, and I have discussed with heads of state there what their version of the what their vision of the European Union is. And there are times when, in fact, their vision of the European Union, as it might be, is in fact something much more positive than the vision from within Europe. And finally, I would say that really I so agree with you in our conversation in Dublin. You mentioned it, and we have discussed it today before I spoke to the Parliament, that the biggest single problem, the great scar across both the prospects for the Union in the future and the present time, is the unemployment problem, with its particularly its youth component, but not only its youth component. The fact that it works in an exclusive way for participation in society. I'd be happy to answer some questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ms. Cahill, please.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, you refer to the danger of handing over democracy to unaccountable agencies. You appear to suggest that there's a danger of creating a new empire complete with serfdom. Every group of society has responsibilities, as you point out, and I apologise for being domestic now, but how do you view the rejection of the Croke Park Agreement by the majority of trade unions in Ireland? Do you think they are taking their responsibilities, showing solidarity, and should the government show solidarity with this vote now? And I have a similar question from Mr. Schulz afterwards, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. You'll appreciate that I cannot comment directly on what is an instrument of the present government. There's a difference in the Constitution there between, if you like, my role and the role of the government of the day. But what you say is very important in terms of what can I say? I do address the issue of unemployment, and where I can be of most assistance is, in fact, in reviewing the adequacy of models that can treat with the present economic difficulties in Europe, and particularly then within that the unemployment problem. You see, where I think it is very interesting is that I do think that why I wanted to stress in my paper about it, it is a matter of a set of technical suggestions that will be replaced by other technical suggestions. There are fundamental issues to be decided. There are ones that I will go on to speak about, that I began to speak about at the London School of Economics and at the Sorbonne, and that I will speak about in the future. For example, there is a practical issue that arises that I am free to speak about, and that is it appropriate that third-level institutions and other institutions would teach just one form of economics? Then there is the other part about it, is that that isn't just an abstract or irrelevant issue, because that is the source of the discourse about why have we so many unemployed people. And then in turn, if in fact you have a single vein of economic theory and practice advising senior policymakers who exclude other models, well then you have a problem. And of course I can't speak at all on the rejection or acceptance of the Croke Park Agreement, but what I'm simply saying is this, is that in any response to it, one has in fact to try and see models that will in fact get us to making an impact on the lives of people. There is no point in for example, there are some things that are noble technically, in relation to, for example, the contraction of economies in Europe. You can actually measure that. But the issue isn't only one of measurement. The issue is one of the connection between the economy and society, and also it also will arise, which is for another day, in relationship of how the European Union looks outside of itself into the global economy.
I was going to ask President Schulz, please, if you agree with President Higgins that there is a danger of recreating a new empire with some form of serfdom, and that the Troika, do you agree that the Troika and the leaders of the Member States are following a single, very narrow economic model? And do you think there's any hope of them breaking with this? Thank you.
Yes, I share his view. I think there is no way to change one view of two basic opinions of the two basic strategies of the last 20 years. One was that as less rules, the fewest amount of rules is the best way to encourage investors to invest and to support activities on the markets. That failed. I quote one of the responsible of the Barclays Bank on a hearing in the House of Commons. We failed not because we had too much rules, we failed because we had not enough rules. Therefore, this approach, we need the market-conform democracy. There's a quote by Angela Merkel. I think she said it spontaneously. I will not presume that it is her personal opinion, but it is described. It is a quote of Angela Merkel. We need the market-conform democracy. No, we need a democracy compatible to the rules of. We need a market with the compatibility of the rules of democracy. And those who need, and that's my second approach, those who have enormous impact by economic power must be accountable to democratic bodies. It is absolutely not possible that, for example, rating agencies, anonymous bodies, nobody knows to whom they belong, on the basis of which criteria they rate, and who are people giving the charges for their ratings, who is paying them. It is impossible that anonymous organizations in New York decide about the fate of whole nations without any accountability. By the way, if such rating agencies like Standard & Poor's rated some weeks before the bankrupt of Lehman Brothers their financial products with AAA, I raise, in addition to democratic accountability, the questions of economic competence. So therefore I share his view. There is not a single way. What we need is a single way to reform the actual economic disaster we have in Europe and worldwide.
President Marco Zatterin La Stampa, I am here, Italy, the other Irish of Europe apparently. Here I am. Okay. President, in your speech you said that many of our citizens in Europe regard the response to the crisis as in their lives as desperate and showing insufficient solidarity with them. Just wonder whether this is your point of view, your sensation as well, and possibly you can. And then the page after that you said that we cannot afford to place our singular trust in a single hegemonic model. Just wonder whether you had one country in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Grazie. I hadn't one country in mind because I think the flaw in the model is in fact something that is shared quite widely. It differs. There is a difference between the Chicago School and there's a difference between forms of order liberalism. But what I really what I'm really concerned about, you know, I could offer you a hypothetical example. If you could reach agreement on a set of fiscal measures that went across different countries, but would you be able to bring the citizens with you? What I'm really arguing for, remember it is the European Year of the Citizens, and what I was really arguing for is a kind of pluralism in economic models for a start. And then I actually point out that one has the basis for that not just in contemporary work, but in other work. And I'm not arguing for something, I'm not simply contrasting, let us say, Keynesianism or post-Keynesianism with neoclassical thought. It's much more interesting than that in a way. It is that you actually need a new economics for a new kind of a new situation. And there is good work on that. But the problem about it is that good new work with alternative models that is pluralist and in its methodology as well as in its theories is not attached to those who are serious policymakers. So that's the second part of your question. It is a flaw in relation to the connection between economy and society that isn't confined to any one country. In relation to your other question about this solidarity, you would say there is a solidarity that goes beyond a solidarity of what we might call fiscal discipline. In preparing for my speech to the European Union, or to the European Parliament, I actually read some other speeches of other visitors, including the visit of Mario Monti, for example. And I saw that speech's reference to fiscal responsibility. Well, you see, I'm not arguing against fiscal responsibility, but I'm simply saying fiscal responsibility has to be placed in the context of the economic problem. Now, you could, what I want to make very, very clear, I just ask us all to remember the debate around the Lisbon Treaty, when, for example, there was what you might call a parity of esteem, a phrase we know in Ireland, between competitiveness and cohesion. And then as I examine the speeches and the language of the European Union, cohesion disappears. And then solidarity, to some extent, had gone before that. So what you do really need to do, what one needs to do, I think that I'm not negative about it at all. I think that when you go abroad and people look over at Europe and they say, they want to see a union. I've met heads of state in South America who've said that they want not to just deal with a single state, they want to speak with the union. And they look at a union, the way that a union, for example, that has has rights, a union that has decent labour conditions, a union that respects men and women equally, a union that is taking an issue in the intergenerational responsibility. These are the unions that we say we can get it, but you won't get it if, in fact, you actually start drawing distinctions. And I think that they are unhelpful, very, very unhelpful, both to all of the peoples of Europe, where you have characteristics of inter-countries and peoples being regarded as somehow lesser because they are not economically described in the same sentences as others. We need something. Europe is about vision. And I said that I would offer my speech about two words, Europe, European and union. I think a union is of its nature. It is either with solidarity or it isn't a union.
Could I ask the President, President Higgins, from a constitutional point of view, are you concerned or worried about the difficulties in Ireland at present between the judiciary and the government?
As is my practice, I will always answer you, Fiach, about that. I am concerned at what has been written about these difficulties, but I believe that myself that the suggestions that have been made that they be quickly resolved is something that everyone would support. Obviously, I have a specific role in relation to, in the Constitution, in relation to the appointment of judges. But all I would say is that on this issue, no more than other issues, arguments, when they start, should have the intention of ending in a way that clarifies and and restores what is a very the clear where the role where all of us are, where the judiciary is, where government is, and where the presidency is. As you know, I am absolutely scrupulous myself about this in relation to the role of the president.
Okay, we can take one last question. That was Mr. Spielman.
Oui, en français pour terminer. Christian Spielman de l'agence France Presse. En fait,
I'm from AFP. I'm going to speak French. I want to ask both of you, please, about the context of your speech, which is about a year before the European elections will take place. And I think that you issued a warning against some clear risks that lie ahead, the disengagement on the part of the citizens from the European ideal. I'd like to ask both of you whether you're concerned about the way events are evolving and whether you think that there will be a large amount of abstentionism, a low voter turnout at the next elections. And I wonder also whether you think there'll be a lot of protest voting. So I'd be grateful for you to, if you could comment on that. You talked, President Higgins, about a technocratic approach and perhaps a monolithic approach on the part of institutions and decision makers, and suggesting that this was perhaps too much the way decisions were being taken in the European Union. But I'm not going to name names either. I just wonder whether you feel that there is still time for people to change their approach and their models before the election, or do you think it's too late? Thank you.
Well, I think that the situation is quite urgent. It's very interesting that, you know, there was a debate on the question of the single models, as I pointed out, initiated by postgraduate students in economics in Paris in 2000. And there was a very important manifesto issued by some teachers of economic theory, some lecturers, in the summer of 2001. I remember that debate. I wish it had been taken seriously. The issue is as to whether, in fact, the citizenry, the citizens who vote in many cases, perceive real choice. If they are to be offered real choice, well, then it requires to be more than a variation, perhaps, on a single model. That's all. I mean, the fact of the matter is that some of us, if after all I spent most of my life in politics, dealing, often accepting my existence as a minority, the important thing for me was the thread of discourse that was there, so that those that you disagree with, you at least talk to them and so forth. But I think that if, to take your point very directly, if participation in the European elections fell, as is happening as a political scientist, to say that there are some times where we seem to be moving into a form of participation rather like that of the United States, where people vote on local committees, but sometimes the vote is dropping in relation to the elections to the Senate and elections of Congress or whatever. So I think that if the vote dropped, it would be a very serious. I think that there is a real danger there for that, and I think that one of the ways of trying to build up, as it were, participation is by having real and adequate choices in relation to different models. And I also think as well, the other part about it is that, you see, it's very easy. We must stop the idea of the European institutions being used as a scapegoat for other people. The part about it, rather like what I've been saying myself in any cases, is that working out options is hard work. It's work that has to be done, and you have to put it in. Maybe in many cases as well, is that I think in some respects, in some of the political parties across Europe, consultations with what is concerned with the daily mood of the public has replaced, to some extent, considerations of what it is that the public needs. So it's time, in a way, for the return of policy, and it's time as well for serious consideration. And your notion about the protest, what is a protest in the end? The finest protest in the end is the production of alternatives. In a way, the other part about it is that you don't die with your alternative while you're still alive. It's a very, very important thing, as rather Aaron Specker would say, is to take your alternative and, as Leonard Cohen might put it, where the cracks let in the light, you lodge as much as you can. But what we do need is a real debate in the European elections in which people speak about all of these different issues.
Je peux ajouter à ce que Président Higgins vient.
I'd just like to add briefly to what President Higgins has said, and quite a brief response, I hope a clear-cut response to your question. I am actually very concerned, extremely concerned. I think that there's been a huge falling off of confidence on the part of citizens in both national institutions and the European institutions. And as I say, this is a source of huge concern to me. Looking forward towards the elections next year, obviously we do have to try to regain the confidence of our citizens, and how we do that, I'm not sure we're clear enough about. It's important that we make some clear proposals to our people and that they see what the alternatives for the future of Europe actually are. And we need to avoid certain things. We need to avoid it just being a dichotomy between those who want to bring European integration to a complete end and the federalists on the other. On the contrary, there are all kinds of different models for deepening and extending integration, but this presupposes a number of things. In my opinion, the following. First of all, we need to recognise that we will have a supranational election campaign. Hitherto, we have normally had national election campaigns for the European elections, but I think we need to have a supranational election campaign. Quite how we go about this is a good question, but in the first instance, I think we need to make sure that we implement Article 17.7 of the treaties, which says that the President of the Commission will be elected by the European Parliament. This will actually ensure that the movements and parties in Europe engage with the issue of who will succeed Mr. Barroso, and they will have to put forward a candidate for that position. Now, why is this important? It's important because all our citizens, all our electors in the countries of the European Union know that they vote at local level, they vote at European level, but they are voting in part to determine who will carry out a certain executive role. In France, for example, there are votes for the National Assembly, votes for the Bundestag, but they're always focused on an individual. They're not focused on the institution. They're focused on the individual who will be representative. Vote Steinbrück or vote Merkel. Perhaps vote left or vote right, but it's the personalities, the individuals with the electoral programs who go head to head in a public debate. That's what our electors are used to, but they're not used to this for European elections. For European elections, people's understanding is, oh, well, if you have 5 minutes to spare on the 22nd of May, pop along and put a cross on a piece of paper, perhaps, if it's sunny. And if not, well, don't worry about it. So we really do need to recognise that we need to have a proper public debate where people engage as to what sort of Europe we want to have. Europe exists. It's not going to be dissolved next year. It isn't going to disappear nor disintegrate. The European Union exerts a vast amount of influence on the daily lives of peoples in general and individuals in specific. And we need to have a public and democratic debate about the direction of Europe. And this is going to take place by the different parties and political movements engaging. And I think we need to have a liberal, a left, a green, a Christian Democrat candidate, etc., for the presidency of the Commission with a clear electoral manifesto. And then my third point is that I think that this will have an important impact. In my view, take the analysis of Ireland, for example. Say, for example, that Labour actually decides to support a German candidate. It doesn't necessarily have to throw its weight behind an Irish nominee. Fine Gael, for example, might decide to support a Belgian candidate and Fine Gael an Italian candidate. All this is possible, you see, in a proper European election, or a Portuguese nominee for that matter. All this is possible. What do you think the Irish people would say? What on earth is going on? Why are national parties getting behind candidates from other countries, international candidates? I don't think this is necessarily going to bring turnouts up to 80%, but I do think it would have a clear impact. I think that the surprise factor would be considerable, and I think the surprise factor can't be underestimated, and I think that this would give us a greater opportunity to achieve a decent voter turnout, and it would mean that we could have the same debates throughout each and every member state of the European Union on the self-same issues in the same kind of terms, and that's how we could change Europe. And then the fourth point that I want to make is that the individual who wins the election will have a majority here in Parliament and will at the same time be elected President of the Commission, not in the wake of endless nights of the long lives discussions between heads of state and government, but for the first time through a democratic vote, an election in which individual citizens of Europe elect the President of the Commission, who carries a weighty responsibility, the head of the executive. Thank you very much.